Hey everybody, and welcome back to another episode of A Brush with Death. I am your host, Miss Casey Hanalei, and in this series I sit down, I tell you a true crime story, and I paint you a pretty picture at the same time. Now, if that sounds like fun to you, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. That way you will never miss one of my terrible, creative, silly, but horrible stories, right? So, like always, before we start into our case, I want to introduce you to our very special guest today, which is a piece that I did a few years ago named Ellis Island. So these are two kiddos coming in on the boats to Ellis Island from Hungary, which is where my family is from. So shout out to all you Hungarians out there. All right, so what case are we covering today? Today is going to be probably a long one and a doozy. It is the Charlie Manson murders, plural. So buckle up, kitty cats, and let's get to this case. So if you've been watching my show for a while, you'll know that I like to kind of center our research around the victim's background and their life and who they were as a person. Obviously, there are a few murders with this case, so I'd like to center my attention around Miss Sharon Tate. Now, with that being said, all of the victims are in this case are equally important. All life is important, right? But we can't be here all day, so Sharon it is. So, Miss Sharon Marie Tate was born January 24th, 1943 in Dallas, Texas. She was the eldest of three daughters. Her father, Paul Tate, was a U.S. Army officer, so their family traveled around a lot. Shout out to all my military families out there. I know how difficult it can be, so stay strong. So Sharon was like a beautiful little girl, and she entered a lot of beauty pageants when she was young and was known for her very striking looks. She spent most of her adolescence in Europe due to her father's military assignments, so her family traveled around a lot. But already she's getting a lot of exposure, performing, and, she wants to be an actress, so she already knew that from a very young age. So in 1960, Sharon is in her early 20s, she's 23, and she's living in Los Angeles. This is when she starts to pursue her acting career and starts to get roles right off the bat, small roles on television, including appearances in The Beverly Hillbillies and Mr. Ed, the one with the talking horse. She also worked as a model and appeared in a lot of fashion magazines at the time. But then she got her breakthrough role in 1966 in Eye of the Devil, which is a psychological horror film, which, I was thinking about it the other day. I always think like horror is like this relatively modern concept, but horror's been around for a long time. I mean, we have The Omen, we have Rosemary's Baby, we have The Exorcist, So if you are a horror head and love it, go ahead and check those older ones out, because there's something about like the older ones that is just a little extra creepy. So if you're into that, you need to check it out. So a year later, this is when she gets her most iconic role in 1967 in Valley of the Dolls, where she plays Miss Jennifer North, a tragic actress inspired by Marilyn Monroe, which if you haven't watched our Marilyn Monroe episode, I will link it above, so you can go ahead and watch that video after this one. Finish this one, then go to Marilyn, right? She was also in a few other films, including the 1969 The Wrecking Crew with Mr. Dean Martin. This was a spy comedy, which sounds amazing. And then she was also in 1967's The Fearless Vampire Killers, which was directed by Mr. Roman Polanski, who would later become her hubby. So a year earlier, in 1966, this is when they meet, Miss Sharon Tate and Roman Polanski, while filming The Fearless Vampire Killers, which sounds like a comedy, but I don't know if it's like a horror movie. It sounds great. But anyway, so that's where they meet, and they get married 2 years later in 1968. and they were often socializing with other celebrities, including Steve McQueen and Warren Beatty. Ooh. And then a year later, this is when Sharon becomes pregnant with their first son. And we'll talk about this a little later, but unfortunately, this pregnancy never comes to fruition. Okay, now we are to Mr. Charles. So Charles Mills Maddox was born November 12th, 1934 in Cincinnati, Ohio, to Kathleen Maddox, who was a teenage runaway with a very, very troubled past. So Charlie's early life was very unstable, and his mother was frequently in trouble with the law, so he spent much of his youth in reform schools and juvenile detention centers. Now, it's important to know that we can feel sorry for the child, right, but not sorry for the adult. So it is always okay to feel bad for the bad start that someone had, but free will and choices we all have, right? So don't feel bad for adult Charlie Manson, but by all means, feel bad for little Charlie. So by his teenage years, Charlie was involved in theft, fraud, and auto theft, spending much of his early life in and out of prison. And then by the time 1967 rolls around, this is when the Manson family begins to form. So after being released from prison, Manson moved to San Francisco during the hippie movement, and he became involved in drugs and mysticism and counterculture scene. So it begins. He was said to have been a very magnetic leader. He gathered a group of mostly young women who were drawn to his charisma and his unconventional ideas, which sounds exactly like the hippie movement, right? This group became known as the Manson Family. Charlie Manson also had a lot of music aspirations. Probably a lot of you know this, especially if you know this case. He wanted to be a musician and tried to gain fame in Los Angeles. He befriended Dennis Wilson of the Beach Boys, who introduced him to influential people in the industry. But he was ultimately rejected by Terry Melcher, who was the record producer, son of Doris Day. He refused Manson, and at that point, Charlie Manson felt very betrayed, which fueled his later crimes. So Charlie Manson had this philosophy of Helter Skelter. So this is inspired by the Beatles' White Album, which we talked about in the John Lennon video. So if you want to go back and watch that one too, I will link it so you can go back and watch that one. But he believed that Helter Skelter was this idea that there was this race war coming, and ultimately he wanted to be on the winning side. So he was trying to get this race war started, and cuckoo nuts bananas. So now we are in 1969, the spring of 1969, and this is when the Manson family takes over Spahn Ranch. Now, Spahn Ranch is like this abandoned movie set. It's like an old Western movie set. So they're like squatting in this place, right? And they start their little community there. And this is where the idea of Helter Skelter starts to simmer, and they commit their first murder. So they had a lot of different associates, and one of those associates was Gary Hinman, or Hinman. I don't talk no good. Sorry, guys. Sorry, Gary. He was a music teacher, an acquaintance of the Manson family. Charlie believed that Gary, had some money or assets that they could, take and fund their commune, right? So Charlie ordered Bobby Beausoleil, Susan Atkins, and Mary Bruner to go to Gary's house and demand the money. So on July 25th, 1969, those three arrive at Gary's home in Topanga Canyon, which I've actually been before. It's beautiful there. And they held him hostage for 2 days. They brutally beat him, tortured him, and demanded money. And he insisted that he had no money. At that point, Manson personally arrived and slashed Gary's face with a sword. I'm sorry for laughing, like, it just seems, why a sword? And then he left, right? So he told his followers to finish the job, right? So July 27th, 1969, Beausoleil finally stabbed Gary in the chest twice, killing him. So later we would find that once the police arrived, that the Manson family actually wrote "Political Piggy" on the wall in blood, Gary's blood, trying to frame the Black Panthers, which is a African-American political group at the time. And I think they're active now, but anyways, in an attempt to frame them to start Helter Skelter, right? Which is dumb plan. Beausoleil took Gary's car, but was arrested a few days later when he was found driving said car with the murder weapon in the back seat. Like, how stupid can you be? So that was the first murder that the Manson family committed and the start of their attempt of fueling Helter Skelter. So now we get to what is called the Tate murders. There are several people, unfortunately, murdered in this one night. So August 8th, 1969, so just a month later from the Gary Hinman murder, Manson orders Tex Watson, Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Linda Kasabian, yes, to go to 10050 Cello Drive, which was formerly rented by Terry Melcher. Remember, he was the music producer that rejected Charlie Manson, but now is rented by Sharon Tate and Roman Polanski. So it's a little unclear if this was like supposed to be a dig at him. I don't really understand it, but anyways. So Manson told them that their goal was to kill everyone inside. So August 9th, 1969, after midnight, the killers arrive at Sharon Tate's house at Cello Drive. The first to die is Stephen Parent, who was just a visitor in the guest house, and he was brutally murdered in the driveway. Around 1 a.m., the killers enter the house and force Sharon Tate, Jay Sebring, Abigail Folger, who is the heiress to the Folger coffee fortune, by the way, and Wojciech Frykowski, I tried my best, into the living room. Around 1:15 a.m., Frykowski and Folger try to escape but are brutally stabbed outside of the house, and then Sebring is shot and stabbed inside. Around 1:30 a.m., Sharon Tate, who is, remember, 8 months pregnant, pleads for her life but is repeatedly stabbed by Atkins and Watson. The killers leave behind the word "pig" written in blood on the door, and that is the attacks at Cello Drive, which is so brutal, and I don't understand why they chose this house. Now, again, like I said, Manson supposedly had a grudge against Terry Melcher, right? So he had these like big dreams of becoming a famous musician, and Terry Melcher rejected him, right? But at the same time, like, Sharon Tate had nothing to do with it. Maybe it was what Sharon Tate represented to him, all of his failures, right? And there was a lot of other, important, influential people in that house as well. So maybe there was a lot of different motivations in this killing. So R.I.P. to Sharon Tate and the others. It's just so brutal and tragic. So Charlie was really unhappy with these first set of murders for a few different reasons. He thought that they were way too messy and way too chaotic. He wanted them to be more like ritualistic and shocking, but he thought that the others had been very sloppy with committing these. Also, the victims fought back, which made the scene even more chaotic and brutal than he intended. Also, the police presence. So the police quickly identified multiple victims and got their, attention with all of the big connections they were making. And so this increased the chance that law enforcement was going to catch on to who was actually doing these murders. And the main point of these murders was to spark Helter Skelter. That's something else that failed. It did not spark Helter Skelter at all. It was just more confusing than anything, right? So Charlie Manson wanted to start a race war and blame the murders on black activists such as the Black Panthers. However, there was no immediate racial or political uproar after the Tate murders, which infuriated him. What was this for? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. And like I said earlier, he thought that they had targeted the wrong people. But again, Charlie, this was your decision to go to this specific house, right? He wanted to get Terry Melcher, didn't know where Terry was, so he thought, oh, I'll just get Sharon Tate and her crew. But ultimately, that was not as satisfying as he thought it was going to be. And he was scared that they were going to get caught too soon with such high-profile people in that house that they killed. The police were slowly, maybe quickly, zooming in on the Manson family. And we'll see that Charlie will join the next set of murders here shortly. Which, yes, there are more murders than this, guys. So, jeez. So, like I said, Charlie Manson was upset with the murders on August 9th. So the very next day, on August 10th, he decides to join the group in looking for victims. So around 1 a.m., Manson and his family are driving around looking for victims to attack. They end up choosing the LaBiancas because they were random and they were a very wealthy couple in a nice neighborhood, making it look like an unpredictable attack meant to spread fear. So he also wanted to improve, like I said, on the Tate murders the day before. So he was joining in these murders to make sure that it was done correctly. Which we'll see he dips out early, which doesn't make any sense. So around 1:30 a.m., sorry for laughing, I won't come through all. They choose Leno and Rosemary it's LaBianca. I'm sorry, I think I said LaBianca before. It's LaBianca home in Los Feliz. Manson ties them up himself and then leaves, which, if you wanted to make sure they were done right, why did you leave, Charlie? But maybe he was trying to have an alibi or something, so if they did get caught, I don't know. So he left Watson Kringwinkel and Leslie Van Houten to carry out the killings. Around 2 a.m., Watson stabs Leno multiple times, while the other two stab Rosemary. Around 2:30 a.m., they write messages in blood on the walls, including "Death to Pigs" and "Helter Skelter," which was spelled Helter Skelter, which is messed up. So, was this one done right, Charlie? It doesn't seem like it. We'll see that initially the police think it was random, right? But they, did their jobs and found out it wasn't. But so many murders. So R.I.P. to the Leno and Rosemary, and same with Gary and Sharon and all the others. These murders were so senseless, and all murder is senseless, right? But it was just, for what? It didn't accomplish anything. And two, even if it had accomplished what Charlie wanted, again, nothing good anyways. So RIP to all of those unfortunate souls. I hope that they are at peace and, in a better place. So like I said before, these cases weren't initially solved in the coming months. So the police were confused at first. So there was nothing that would connect the victims in these cases. It seemed random, but there were the writings on the wall, like pig and Helter Skelter, misspelled, right? In order to frame the Black Panthers, but nothing really became of that, right? It didn't spark anything. So there was also no forced entry at the LaBianca household, so this made the police think that maybe they knew the killers. So there's just a lot of confusion around all of these cases. They didn't know whether to connect them or not. Also, Sharon Tate and Sebring were like high up in the Hollywood scene, high Hollywood figures. So they thought that maybe these murders were more drug related and motivated instead of like random crimes. It was just all in all very messy and confusing, and no one knew what was really happening until the arrest for the Gary Hingman murder, remember, a few months earlier. So Miss Susan Atkins was arrested for that, and also Bobby Beausoleil was arrested for that murder. And Miss Susan Atkins ended up confessing to her cellmate in jail that she had killed Sharon Tate. Now, I'm not going to go into what she actually said about Sharon because it's terrible. But the cellmate of Susan Atkins went right to the police, and it broke the case wide open. And like I said, also Bobby was arrested in connection with Gary's murder. And this kind of, so they like are looking at this murder scene, right? And remember, they also wrote "Political Piggy" on the wall at Gary's place. So they're trying to start to make connections between at least the LaBianca murders and Gary Hingman's murder. So they're starting to make that connection. Also, Tex Watson, who was involved with the later murders, he also, well, he like first ran away to Texas, right? And then was arrested and extradited back to California, and he ended up confessing to the murders and giving details on them that only the killers would know. So they have a lot of evidence against the Manson family, and we will see that soon they will take them to trial in connection to all these murders. June 15th, 1970, this is when the Manson family trial begins, and what a spectacle it was. There were several things that I wanted to talk about this trial. First was Charlie Manson's very bizarre behavior in court. So Manson, if you're familiar with him at all, you'll know that he carved an X into his forehead, later modifying it into a swastika to show he had removed himself from society. Which, jeez. He disrupted the trial constantly, laughing, shouting, and making threats against the judge and prosecution, which sounds like a great guy. And he tried to intimidate the jury by staring at them and making hand gestures, which, if you haven't seen a picture of Charles Manson, he's like a terrifying looking individual. Like, he's like the king evil hippie, right? Like, ugh. Doesn't look good. And not in a good way. Not in a good way, guys. Second, the role of Helter Skelter in the prosecution's case was very notable. The prosecutor, Vincent Bugliosi, I just nail them every time, guys. He successfully argued that Manson's motive was his Helter Skelter race war prophecy. He convinced the jury that the murders weren't random, but part of a plan to start chaos. This was one of the first cases where a prosecutor convicted someone of murder without them physically killing anyone. So Manson, spoiler alert, was convicted of murder. But like we said before, he wasn't actually there. But he was convicted like he did personally commit these, which was like hadn't happened before, which was revolutionary, right? But I think justified as well. Also, Linda Casabian's testimony was very crucial in this case. Now, she, if you remember, she was one of the Manson family members who was present at the murders, but said she didn't participate. She became a star witness for the prosecution. She gave a detailed first-hand account of both murder nights, and her testimony helped secure the conviction. Oh my God, I can't talk today. Convictions of the Charlie Manson and all of the other family members. So if it wasn't without her testimony, I don't know where this case would have gone. So thank you to Linda. But she took a plea deal, so don't thank her just yet. The Manson family women's loyalty and also their disturbing behavior was another thing I wanted to mention. It was creepy. So Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Leslie Van Houten showed no remorse during the trial. They sang, giggled, and chanted in unison as they displayed loyalty to Manson, which, ew. They shaved their heads, oh, wow, and carved X's into their foreheads just like Manson did. Now, did they turn them into swastikas later? I don't know, but yikes. So the death penalty and the sentence changes. So they were all sentenced to death January 25th, 1971. But unfortunately, well, maybe not unfortunately, but in 1972, California abolished the death penalty, so all of their sentences were commuted to life in prison. So bye-bye, you will never see the light of day again. I don't know how you guys feel about the death penalty. Let me know in the comments. I've gone like kind of back and forth. I used to be a really strong believer in the death penalty just because, like, if you kill, I think you deserve, you know, an eye for eye kind of thing. However, I've read statistics that it's like 1 out of 25 people on death row are like wrongfully convicted, which I probably should have looked it up before I said that, but it's somewhere around there. It's like staggering statistic. And so that kind of made me change my mind a little bit. Like, it's better that they serve life in prison. And two, I think that's like ultimately a worse punishment, right? Because they'll have to live their life thinking about what they did and in, you know, hopefully isolation. And, you know, prison doesn't sound very nice either. They're probably getting beaten up or worse, right, in prison. So I think that's a pretty bad punishment. But anyways, I just wanted to talk about that statistic really quick, and I wanted to see what you guys thought about the death penalty. Are you for? Are you against? Are you neutral? Like, where do you guys stand on that? So guys, I looked it up on my phone, on the Google machine. And according to witnesstoinnocence.org, at least 4.1% of defendants sentenced to death in the United States are innocent. Which, yeah, that's about 1 in 25. Which is a staggering statistic. Like, 1 out of 25 people are innocent on death row. That's why I go back to not for the death penalty, because I just don't want to take that chance. Like, what do you guys think? In like case-by-case basis, right? Like, sometimes you know for sure that this person did it, right? And they deserve to have something done to them that they did to somebody else. But at the same time, like, sometimes there are crazy cases out there where you are 100% positive that this person did it, and then like DNA tests come back and they didn't, which is crazy, right? So I don't know. I don't want to take that chance. I think death penalty shouldn't be a thing. I think that should be up to God, and that's it, right? We should not play God in this instance. But let me know what you guys think. I'm curious to see where you guys lie. So the Manson family trial was a huge impact on the U.S. legal system and also like our culture in general. The Manson trial was one of the longest and most expensive trials in U.S. history at the time. It changed the way prosecutors handled cult-related crimes as well, showing that a leader could influence its people to kill someone and not directly kill them themselves. It also shattered the peace and love image in the 1960s, which showed a very, very dark side to this counterculture movement. Oh, so yeah, it was a crazy, crazy trial, crazy case. And it just kind of keeps getting crazier. So a few other key takeaways that I wanted to talk about. So Miss Susan Atkins, in 1974, she claimed from prison that she found Jesus and became a Christian. She became a born-again Christian, which, if that's true, like, good for her. But it doesn't excuse what she did, right, earlier in her life. So she had been expressing remorse and stated that she had been under Manson's control during the murders, which, yeah, probably, but girl, you still got to pay for what you did. In 2000, she said that, "I am so sorry. I wish I could take it back, but I could not." Yeah, I'm sure you do. She was denied parole 13 times. And despite her apologies, her role in the brutal killings kept her behind bars. In 2008, she was diagnosed with terminal brain cancer and applied for compassionate release, but she was denied due to the severity of her crimes, which I agree with. She unfortunately died in 2009. She passed away at the ripe old age of 61. She was only 61 years old. That is young. And she was still in prison, so bye. So what was Charlie up to in prison? So Charlie, he's just a crazy, I don't want to say person. I don't think he's a person. He's just a crazy thing out there. Even in prison, Manson attracted followers, which, come on guys, including young people who viewed him as a messianic figure. He received hundreds of letters from admirers and continued to manipulate people from behind bars. He even persuaded young women to shave their heads and carve X's into their foreheads, just as he did during the trial. Now, I think it's Bailey Sarian that says, "Get better idols." And I agree with her. Like, guys, we can do better. We can do better than that. Guys, just look at what he's done. Anyways. He also was set on fire. In 1984, a fellow inmate tried to kill Manson by setting him on fire after Manson bragged about burning people alive, which I don't think he ever did. But, again, I'm not promoting violence, but probably deserved, right? He had several altercations with guards and inmates, often making threats and acting erratically. He also gave very bizarre interviews from prison, chilling, to say the least. One of his most famous interviews was in 1994 with Diane Sawyer. He claimed that, "I am the devil, and I am here to do the devil's business." Which, okay, from prison, like, how's that going? His erratic behavior made people wonder if he was truly insane or just playing mind games, which I think it was probably a combination of both. You know, looking at his childhood, he probably had a lot of trauma going on there. And again, we can feel bad for baby Charlie Manson and not adult Charlie Manson, right? But I also think that turned him into a master manipulator, and, you know, we all have free will, and he chose to use that for evil. So I think it was definitely a combination of both. He then took the original X carving in his forehead and converted it into a swastika while in prison. Goals, right? I'm kidding. He tattooed himself with strange symbols and continued using Nazi imagery to shock people. Again, like, get better idols, guys. He also, speaking of idols, he also got married. So in 2014, at the ripe old age of 80 years old, he almost married 26-year-old Afton Starr Burton, who was obsessed with Manson. But unfortunately, the marriage fell apart because Manson realized that she only wanted him for his body. And not how you think. She wanted his body after he died because she wanted to display it in a glass coffin and make money off of it. Okay. Anyways, I also saw that the guy who owns the Haunted Mansion here in Vegas, what's his name? You guys are going to yell at me. He was also in the running to get Charlie Manson's body. I should have looked it up before I did this. I always say that. I should do more research, probably. But he was like in the bidding for Charlie Manson's body to display at the Haunted Mansion. But I don't know where that ever went. Obviously, I don't think he has it now. I don't think it's there. But I just thought it was, interesting. I'll try to look it up. So look at me doing research during my actual video. Sorry, guys. So, yes, Zak Bagans of the Haunted Museum, not Haunted Mansion, sorry about that. The Haunted Museum here in Las Vegas, he tried to get Manson's body, but was unfortunately denied. He didn't get that. But he did acquire some of his bone fragments, and then he got a hospital gown and a toe tag from Jason Freeman, Manson's grandson, who did end up acquiring his body. So he donated it to the Haunted Museum in order to, I don't know, he said that there was some like paranormal activity in his home because of those items, so he donated them to Zak Bagans. So if you want to come see some Charles Manson memorabilia, come to Las Vegas, hit me up, and we can go see them together. Yeah, maybe not. Okay, so yeah, he's dead now. He was denied parole 12 times, so sorry, Charlie. Sorry, Charlie. He died November 19th, 2017 at the age of 83 due to natural causes. But it was complications to colon cancer, so I heard colon cancer is very painful, so I hope that his death was brutal. What he deserves. And even after death, people fought over the remains, like I said, and his ashes were reportedly stolen during his funeral service, but they were ultimately scattered in the California hills by his grandson. So I don't know if he's resting in distress right now. I hope he is, right? And now 2020 and beyond, so right now it's 2025, all of the surviving family members, Manson family members, are still in prison and will be denied parole, fingers crossed, until the end of time. So that is Charlie Manson, everyone. So now let's get back into Sharon Tate, like we should, and close out with her legacy. So Roman Polanski, Sharon's husband, never fully recovered from the loss of Sharon. And her mother, Doris Tate, became a huge advocate for victims' rights, working to keep the Manson family behind bars. Sharon Tate's life and tragic death have become kind of a symbol of many films and books and stuff. And one I want to mention was Quentin Tarantino's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, 2019. If you haven't seen it, it's an interesting take on this case. Margot Robbie plays Sharon Tate, and she actually survives in this version. So I think it's interesting to see like how it would even work out if she ended up surviving. And there's a great scene with a flamethrower in it. So if you haven't watched it, go and watch that movie. It's good. So back to Doris. So Doris Tate, her mother, she founded the Citizens for Truth organization. It is aimed at keeping the Manson family killers behind bars and also advocating for tougher sentencing laws. She also campaigned against the early release of violent offenders, which go Doris. She helped pass Proposition 8 in California in 1982, which is also called the Victim Bill of Rights, which strengthened laws protecting crime victims. She was instrumental in California's no parole for murderers law, which made it harder for convicted killers to be released early, which, yes, behind bars. She often spoke on TV and radio, raising awareness about victims' rights and crime laws. She created the Sharon Tate Crime Victims Bureau as well to support families of violent crime victims, which she sounds like an amazing woman. And doing this all in Sharon Tate's memory, which is amazing. She continued to fight against the parole of the Manson family members up until her death in 1992. Her daughters, Patty and Deborah, I think I combined those two names, Patty and Deborah Tate, who are Sharon's sisters, continued her work ensuring that Sharon's murderers would remain behind bars. Doris Tate's advocacy has lasted impact on U.S. law, shaping victims' rights legislation, and keeping convicted murderers behind bars and held accountable. She transformed her grief into action, helping countless victims find a voice. So like always, I like to end on a quote from our victim. Sharon was a very gentle soul, a very gentle personality. She was said to be very optimistic and graceful, and the words that I chose, it shows how like grounded but hopeful she was, and also humble yet ambitious, I think. So the quote that I chose was, "Everything that's realistic has some sort of ugliness in it. Even a flower is ugly when it wilts, a bird when it seeks its prey, and the ocean when it becomes violent." So with that quote, I think about like everything and everyone has something good and bad within them. I think everyone is a mixture of those two things, right? No one is black and white, right? But we need to seek out the good in everyone and try to find it, right? Sometimes it's hard with certain people, right? Especially Charlie Manson. But I think it's important to remember that with everything good, there's some bad to it, right? No one's perfect. Try to remember that. Try to remember that there is good in everyone and seek that out. So, with that being said, let's look at the finished piece. Oh, she's beautiful. So I really like this one. I like the tone of it. It's very 60s, like yellow ochre and like gold. I didn't put any gold in it, but it does kind of have a sheen to it. Oh, Sharon, I hope you like this. I think you look gorgeous. And I know that you're up there with your baby boy and you're together and in a better place and looking down on us, and I hope you like it. All right, guys. Well, I hope you liked that case as much as I love putting them together. And be safe out there. Be nice to each other. I hope you have a great day. And don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss one of my next stories, right, of A Brush with Death. And I will see you in the next one, guys. Bye.